Technology and its disruptions on the labor market should remind us just how important it is to ensure that the folks around us have the soft skills they need to succeed in any job, because we have to be malleable. I mean, very few people go through their whole career without having to pivot or change in some way. The types of folks who are entering their career 40, 45 years ago, many folks, the job they entered no longer exists, and they had to evolve, they had to change with time.
Welcome to Unnatural Selection, a show about competition, innovation, and the strategies shaping tomorrow's frontiers. I'm Nick Encina. Each week, we speak with pioneers shaping the future.
This is episode 40 of Unnatural Selection. Youth homelessness is a large yet often unseen social problem. Unlike chronic homelessness, it doesn't always stand out. These are young people who may look like classmates, coworkers, or friends, while quietly struggling with housing insecurity. The needs are immense, and traditional safety nets often fail to catch them. In this episode, we speak with Connor Schoen, co-founder of Breaktime, about how his team is pioneering new ways to identify those in need, engage them, and equip them with the soft skills and resilience required in a world where technology is rapidly reshaping the value of hard skills. Connor is the co-founder and co-executive director of Breaktime. Born and raised in Westboro, Massachusetts, Connor has always been driven to create positive social change in his home state. As a Harvard student, he began volunteering at a local homeless shelter and was struck by how many young adults his age were experiencing homelessness, often after being rejected by their families for their sexuality or gender identity. Thus, in 2018, Connor co-founded Breaktime with a fellow shelter volunteer and Harvard classmate, Tony Schoen, to end young adult homelessness through employment and empowerment. Breaktime has evolved from its early beginnings into a nationally recognized nonprofit with a lasting impact across Massachusetts and beyond. This past year, Breaktime transitioned from renting an office in Boston's West End to purchasing its first permanent home at 63 Franklin Street in downtown Crossing, establishing a lasting hub for innovation and collaboration to end young adult homelessness. Connor has been named to Forbes 30 Under 30 for social impact, and most recently was honored by WBUR with its inaugural Community Honors Award, recognizing 5 leaders shaping the future of Greater Boston through service. Let's go.
Connor, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to Unnatural Selection.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation, but before getting going, just to level set, always the same question. So, Connor, could you please tell us what need or impact drives your work?
Absolutely. I believe that every single young person deserves the support and opportunities they need to reach their full potential. That's what's always driven me. And I think that unfortunately for the transition-aged youth population, young people ages 18 to 24, for those that don't have rental support, family support, a financial safety net, it is incredibly challenging to navigate that part of your life and build towards a future of stability, success, fulfillment, without some support. And so that's always what's driven me, is how do we find ways to support that young adult age population and create tools and resources that are specific to their needs, because they're not quite at, they don't quite need the same things as, say, a 35-year-old, a 50-year-old, and they don't need the same things as a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old. So how do we really target that population and create the right bridge to their future success?
That's incredible. And I definitely, I applaud the work. I still remember what it was like during that age, and it's a confusing and scary time.
Very
For as confident or faux confident as you may feel, it's definitely terrifying, even under the best circumstances. And
absolutely.
to get concrete before we dive in, could you give us a quick overview of what Breaktime actually does?
Yes. So Break Time, our mission is to break the cycle of young adult homelessness. And what we specifically do is we equip young people with the job and financial security to achieve housing security. So we're not a housing or shelter organization. We actually work in partnership with housing organizations, and we provide the other things that a young person needs to sustain housing for the long term. So our core program involves 3 weeks of soft skills job training. That's called our Launchpad program, getting our young people set up with the soft skills they need to succeed in any career. Then there's a 3-month paid job placement called Liftoff, where a young person is placed at one of our local employment partners in all different industries for 3 months of employment. And then after that, our Stable Orbit program is 3 years of continued wraparound support and financial support to help that individual sustain employment for the long term and continue to grow in their career, build financial security, build savings, build credit, build a foundation for their future success. And ultimately, through doing so, set themselves up for long term housing security. There's a lot of other aspects to what we do, a lot of things that we layer on top of that, but it all connects to job and financial security and wraparound support for that young person to make housing security and ultimately to make their success, fulfillment, and happiness a reality for the long term.
Well, okay. So yeah, so when I hear that, it sounds almost like an accelerated program to get almost like a not necessarily a business degree, but an all-encompassing education on the skills that you need to succeed in society, right? So they probably could you tell us a little bit about what that educational program looks like? What's the curriculum? Is it one size fits all, or is it tailored towards somebody who says I'm more interested in engineering versus I'm more interested in business versus marketing and so on? How do you look at the educational component?
Yeah, well, the first part of Breaktime's core program, Launchpad, those 3 weeks of training, is really focused on the soft skills that everyone needs to succeed in the workforce. I think, particularly now, as we look at how artificial intelligence and other factors are shaping the labor market, the one thing that I think all employers, all recruiters can agree on is soft skills are absolutely invaluable and irreplaceable. Punctuality, attendance, engagement, communication, professionalism. These are the kinds of things that, as long as someone as an employee is willing to learn and grow, you just need that as a foundation. You can't get anywhere with someone unless they're showing up, unless they're communicating appropriately, unless they're coming to work in a professional way. And those are the kinds of skills that when you're 18 to 24, you haven't necessarily had the opportunity to establish or cultivate those skills unless you've had the privilege to say have an internship or grow up in a family environment where these skills have been um, you've been mentored to adopt these skills. And so for us, that 3-week program is really a boot camp in developing those soft skills you need to succeed in any job. We have young people who want to go into medicine. We have young people who want to become cooks. We have young people who want to become engineers. We have young people who want to become designers, architects, musicians. We have young adults, or as we call them, associates, from with interest in every single industry imaginable. And what we focus on at break time is setting them all up with those transferable soft skills that, whether they stay in the same career track or they pivot like so many people do throughout their career, they will always have those fundamental building blocks that are going to serve them in whatever job they choose. And so our Launchpad program really focuses on, it's a very engaged, immersive, hands-on, cohort-based program that goes through those skills and helps young people to develop those skills so that they succeed on the job. I mean, the kinds of things that, you might take for granted for knowing when you go to work are not always implicit or obvious to someone who's new to the workforce. What are the customs around how you communicate to your boss if you're going to be late or you're sick? What is the appropriate way? What is the professional way to communicate with your colleagues? If you have a disagreement or conflict with a colleague, how do you go about resolving that? These are things that we go through simulated scenario based trainings to actually show young adults before they get on the job how to do it right. So when the situation arises, they're ready. Our young people don't get a lot of second chances. There's a lot of stigma and a lot of doubt that's cast our young people's way, both because of the insecurity and stability of their life, but also the communities they come from. 87% of our young people identify as people of color. Almost 40% identify as LGBTQ plus. Our young people are coming from backgrounds that are already stigmatized and where they already face barriers to success just because of who they are. And so if we can prepare them to really knock it out of the park when they start a job, then we can set them up to sustain that job and ultimately grow in their career.
Super interesting. And but I don't want to jump to, I have questions later on about, you mentioned AI and the way that society is changing. And I definitely want to dive into that. But just to set a little bit more context, because you mentioned some of the demographics of the type of young persons that come to your program. Um, but can you tell us what's like the single most misunderstood aspect of youth homelessness that you wish more people grasped and understood?
The single most misunderstood aspect of young adult homelessness is that it's not the same as chronic homelessness. It's not the same as street homelessness. It's not the same as the first mental image that probably pops up in your head when you think about homelessness. For most people, when they think about homelessness, they think about the most visible example that comes to mind, which is usually in a city, seeing somebody who is living or residing on the street, um, who might be going through acute psychosis, who might be going through uh, challenges with substance use disorder. The most visible sort of graphic image that comes to mind is that. And that is such a tiny percentage of the overall homelessness issue. For young adults, most of homelessness is I'm sleeping on a friend's couch, or I'm sleeping in a place. I'm not on the lease. I'm not protected, but I'm bunking with someone. I'm doubled up. We're sharing a bed because, we can't afford rent. I'm staying with a family member, but I'm worried about violence. I'm worried about challenges and conflicts with this family member. Or I'm staying in a shelter. Sometimes I'm staying on the street. I'm sleeping out in the open because there's nowhere else to go. But for our young people, most of the young people we work with, they're just in this transient space where they don't have the money they need to afford stable rent to be on a lease. And they're just doing what they can to make it work, making sacrifices and taking big risks sometimes to have a place to stay. But ultimately, what they need is very different than what somebody who has been living on the streets for 10 or 15 years needs. And that person experiencing chronic homelessness, that might be the first person who comes to mind. But the thousands and thousands of young people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts who are experiencing housing insecurity, we don't see them. We don't see them. You know, might be friends with or colleagues with someone who's experiencing this, and we wouldn't know because we don't know what their living arrangement is when they go home. We don't know exactly what they're going through. We don't know the risks within their household that might make it an unstable and unsafe situation. And so the biggest thing I want people to know about young adult homelessness is it's not as visible of a problem, but it's a deep and important challenge that affects young people at the inflection point of their life. Where for anyone who, as you mentioned, Nick, has gone through that period of life, it's a time of transition. It's a time where you should have the opportunity to explore yourself, your interest, to take risks, to make mistakes. And if you don't know where you're going to sleep tonight, you can't do any of that. And so it's an issue that might be invisible to most of us, but that makes it even more important to tune in and to really understand the experiences of these young people and support them, setting them up for long term success throughout their life.
I'm glad you said it and put it so eloquently, because I was thinking the same thing from not being in that space. When I think about homelessness, it's always the obvious visual cues that
Yeah.
you look for that, like you said, are probably more on the chronic side, maybe people with psychoses and mental illness. And so they kind of stand out and you're like, okay, that person seems homeless. But I do read stats on the, um, kind of like the broad ranging influence of youth homelessness, but you don't see them, or you do, but you don't recognize them because they look like everybody else in the street, right? They're young kids, dressed like young kids, doing what young kids do. There's no way of being able to identify that person as being a person in need unless they self-identify as such.
Yeah, and some young people wouldn't even self-identify as such. I mean, I know a lot of young people. I know have worked with folks who say, as I learned about young adult homelessness, I realized that that was me, or I realized that that is me right now. That's my experience. And so Break Time's team, our community outreach team, goes out and we have conversations with young adults to understand their situation, what they might be experiencing, and to identify the risk factors of homelessness and housing insecurity that they might not even be aware of or thinking about. Because at break time, we want to prevent the issue of homelessness just as much as we want to address the issue of homelessness. So we work with both folks who are at risk and folks who are actively experiencing homelessness. And that means having conversations with folks who wouldn't self identify as homeless, who wouldn't self identify as housing insecure necessarily. But as we get to know them and understand their situation, realizing that they're, staying with an elderly relative and they risk losing their housing if that person passes away. They are staying with someone. It's a very volatile situation. They're not on the lease, they're not protected. These are things that are very common with young adults. Many young people are experiencing this, but we wouldn't think of it as homelessness and we wouldn't think of it, even some of the young people themselves are not thinking of it that way. So a lot of our work is not just to educate the public on this issue, but also to educate young adults so they understand and are seeking the right resources for their particular situation.
Yeah, and I can see the need for innovating in this space because, as we just made very clear, the populations that are most vulnerable in this space are often floating under the radar, right? They're either not easily identifiable or they choose not to identify, or like you said, in some cases, they don't even identify as being homeless to themselves until they really think about what that really means. And so that means that you have to innovate and you're addressing probably a space that was very unaddressed beforehand because again they were floating under the radar, people weren't focusing necessarily on them, and so that means that for you to drive the impact that you're interested in driving, you have to do everything from figuring out how do you contact people that are not identified as being homeless. They're kind of floating under the radar. So, how do you find them in the first place? How do you message to them that this is a valuable resource? And then everything from there on down to how do you bring them through a process that educates them on the skills that they need? What does that curriculum and that process look like? How do you prepare them for the workforce and place them somewhere? So, I can see how at every step of the way, it sounds like you had to innovate all the little things, from identification to engagement to training to placement and all the way down the path. Does this kind of summarize kind of your journey since 2018?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and in every area you described, we've faced innumerable challenges and hurdles, and there's always a bottleneck somewhere in that whole chain of that whole pipeline of the work that we do. Um, and I'll start with the identification problem because as we're talking about the issue of young adult homelessness, how it's sort of this hidden challenge, even to folks experiencing the issue, that makes the recruitment of young people particularly challenging. And so the way that we've addressed that, I mean, first and foremost, we work incredibly collaboratively with every organization that we can think of that is interfacing with young people who are experiencing housing insecurity. We work with 18 to 24-year-olds who are homeless, housing insecure, or at risk. And we're working with case managers and folks at other organizations to identify who they're already working with, where break time services could add value to what that organization is providing and help to provide holistic support to that young person. And so that's first and foremost the way that we get to young adults is through referrals and through maintaining really strong partnerships. Our community outreach team will go in person to shelters. And just talk to young adults about what we offer and educate them and understand their situation and how we can best support. The second biggest way we recruit young adults is through young adults themselves. Our young people have networks of family, friends, and other folks that they know who are experiencing the same challenges that they're experiencing. They've seen how Break Time's program, firsthand, they've seen how it can have a transformative impact on their lives. And so they're referring their friends, they're referring their families, family members. And so referrals from young adults themselves is actually outpacing referrals from other organizations. It's becoming like our largest source of recruitment because young people have become the biggest ambassadors. Alumni of our program have become the biggest ambassadors for what we do. And they know the community and they know and can identify easily folks in their life who are experiencing similar challenges. And then finally, we do direct outreach. I mean, we have young people who come here because we partner with the Boston Public Library and we have flyers there and they learn about break time. We do a lot on social media. We just relaunched a new version of our website that's really geared towards young adults, from the colors we chose to the logo, which was actually selected by young people in our program. And so we market directly out to young adults, and sometimes they find us online, sometimes they find us at the library. We're out at community events all the time, and so recruitment ends up being, a really all hands on deck effort. And it's something that used to be a bottleneck, which was always so frustrating to me because we know the issue exists. I can show you all the data in the world of how big of a challenge this is, and that there's gaps in the ecosystem and the ways that young people need to be supported. But then I couldn't find, all the young people that needed the support, and that was always frustrating. And so now I'm really proud of the fact that we've adopted and developed a strategy, and we have a team that is really, really great. We have hundreds of young people coming to us every year. We have an open house, every other week at our space, which is in downtown Crossing, really easy for folks to get to. And so we've gotten really creative and been able to find ways to meet young people where they're at and bring them into our ecosystem of support.
Hmm, incredible. And are you mostly based out of the Boston area, or is it broader Massachusetts? Because I can think about areas like Lawrence, Mass, or Revere, or other places where you would find probably a good concentration of homeless youths. Do you expand that far, or is it right now kind of concentrated in the Boston area?
Yeah, so our work extends across Massachusetts. We're located right in the heart of Boston, and folks are able to get to us from all over because we're so close to South Station, downtown Crossing, really the major transit hubs of our state that branch out to all different corners of the state. So we do have folks coming from all over. But in terms of ways to meet young people where they're at, we've also developed some innovative approaches to delivering our program in alternative ways to reach folks in different geographies. So we have a virtual version of our Launchpad program that's, again, our soft skills job training program. We have a satellite version where we actually bring that program out to sites in other parts of the state. For example, we've done this in Quincy and Brockton. We've brought our trainers directly to young adults staying at shelters there, bringing the program directly to them because it was harder for them to get to us. And so we've innovated ways to have our work sort of transcend the boundaries of geography. We are just Massachusetts focused right now, and so we don't extend beyond our state. And most of our young people are Boston or Greater Boston based, but we certainly have reached beyond that and have found ways to meet folks beyond the borders of our city and the metro area.
Let's unpack that innovation path that we tapped into just a second ago, because again, at every one of these different steps, you've had to innovate and come up with new mechanisms from, like we said, engagement and identification all the way through the process. And I would imagine that this space, especially on homelessness, is largely viewed more as charitable work. But it seems like you're transforming it more into entrepreneurial work and empowering and educating a future workforce that could be everything from, like you said, going into medical fields to all kinds of different things, right? So I think first and foremost, your first innovation in my mind is just the mindset of how to approach this, right? It was like, oh, I want to address this, but I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to empower these people and how to do and become a better version of themselves, not just through charitable work. And it kind of draws to my mind the age old saying about teaching someone how to fish, right? You're not just feeding them, you're actually teaching them how to do for themselves. Does that capture a little bit of your thinking when you first went into it?
Absolutely. And when I first started break time, I was, in my freshman year at Harvard studying applied mathematics and economics. And so I was, surrounded by folks and professors whose expertise was in business, was in entrepreneurship. And I bring that mindset to the work I do at break time because a nonprofit, operates like any other business with, certain big differences, including our revenue and just the way that we think of what our bottom line is, which is the impact. Um, But I always have thought about nonprofits as operating in the context of a market failure that the government also has not been able to address. And so let me unpack that a little bit more. Um, there are certain challenges that we know that the market cannot fix or that the market has created. And traditionally in economics, we think of the government as the entity that is responsible for fixing that or um, enforcing policies that adjust the market, push the market to fix that challenge. But we know, and we can see every single day, that there are limitations to that. There are limitations to what the government is able to do. And so that's why the nonprofit sector, which in other countries is often called the non-governmental sector, exists to address those market failures, to fill in the gaps where market economics and the government have not been able to solve the problem. And young adult homelessness is certainly an example of that. But to solve a challenge that exists within a market failure, you got to bring innovation, you got to bring a business mindset. The biggest thing that's different is the revenue strategy. When you think about building a business and building a successful business, you think about sales or another form of revenue that's driving that, that's driving your growth as a business. You're thinking of a market strategy to profitability and long-term success. When you're in a market failure, you don't have that revenue stream. There's not that natural way. It's a market failure. There's no natural way to generate enough revenue to address the problem. So you've got to rely on the generosity of the philanthropic sector, of the government and government grant programs and individuals that donate to support your work, and think about creative ways that you can leverage market solutions to the problem and generate earned revenue to support your work. And so that's all a way of saying that social challenges, the biggest, most intractable challenges that we have as a society, um, can and should be solved, and a business mindset can help. Because while the exact approach or the exact method of getting revenue to address these issues isn't the same as with a typical business, a lot of the same principles can be applied. A lot of the things I learned in my applied mathematics and economics degree can be applied to how you think about these challenges. And I think should be. We need to create nonprofit organizations that operate efficiently and effectively and get the job done for our young people. So I've always brought that mindset to my work. And every time we encounter a challenge, I'm so blessed to work with a team that really approaches everything we do from the mindset of collaborative innovation, the idea of working together to create social change. I think that's the other biggest difference with the for-profit sector. We think a lot about competition that drives capitalism, that drives the market, that drives how businesses operate. In the nonprofit sector, we think about the power of collaboration and how collaboration unlocks the ability for every organization to kind of specialize and to look to lean into a niche where they can get really, really good at what they do and partner with others on the things that they're not focused on. And so that's what Breaktime's always believed in. If we didn't believe in the power of collaboration, we would probably have housing, we'd have shelter, we would be trying to do all the things that a young person needs. But there are lots of incredible organizations that are already doing that. We're partnering with them, we're working with them, and they're sending young people to us for employment, to develop financial security, to get the wraparound support and other services that they need. And so at the end of the day, I've always thought of my work in the context of innovation, just like somebody who's doing a for-profit startup. With a focus on collaboration and a focus on thinking creatively about how partnership can lead to the solutions versus competition versus trying to be the best, which ultimately, in the case of our young people, it's not serving them to think that way. So that mindset has always driven me as a leader. And I think being exposed and being educated in the world of for-profit businesses, in the world of market economics, has really helped give me some perspective that's allowed me to maximize the impact that break time is having on the young people that we serve and maximize the scale and scope of what we do as an organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's I've been on the both the for-profit and the nonprofit side, and I do feel that the people that bring for-profit mentality to the nonprofit space often tend to be disproportionately successful, because whether you're on the for-profit or the nonprofit side, economics factors in, branding factors in, relationships factor in, politics factor in. And so the more that you have mastery over those different skill sets, mathematics, and all the skills that you have that you would bring to a for-profit factor into this place as well, into the nonprofit space. And again, as the more that you have mastery over that, the better that you do your job, because whether you're doing something in homelessness or selling a widget, there still has to be the perceptible metrics around what value means. Or in nonprofits, value is more measured in the metric of impact. But then
Yeah.
you have to define that impact, right? Especially if you go out to funders or grants and so on, you have to be able to show that this is how you measure success, which is your impact. And then you have to be able to show that you're driving that impact in one way or the other. So so yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. In that topic, then, how do you measure impact? And at this point, you've been running break time for 7 going on 8 years, right? So you've had a few cohorts go through your system, and presumably you're learning still. Every single year you learn something better, you improvise and you innovate, and you change and evolve over time. But how have the years taught you what your impact is, and then how to measure it?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're totally right. I mean, at the end of the day, a nonprofit is as a corporation, it just has tax exemption, and so and the metric that we're driven by is impact, not profit. And so for us at Break Time, everything we do is driven by the data of what's working, what's best serving our young adults. The young adults are ultimately, the customer, so to speak, and the folks that we care the most about, and so what are they getting out of our services is what drives us and drives our strategy. There's really three metrics that encapsulate really that impact and what we think of as our core uh, key performance indicators that drive our work. The first metric, which captures the job security of young adults, is, are young people working and or in school after our program? Are they sustaining that over time? Folks coming into our program, many of them are unemployed, many of them are not currently in school. And what we can do as an organization, we can get folks into the workforce, we can get folks into education, connect them with great opportunities. And so that's the first metric that we think about, is how are we doing in terms of getting folks into the workforce and into education. We have very high levels of success there, and we find that there's also sustainability in those metrics over time because we support young folks for the long term. Secondarily, we think about financial security and how the financial stability of a young person looks over time. When they come in, they might have very little or no money in their bank account. They might have no credit score. They might have delinquencies that they might have inherited from someone else using their credit. And they might not really have any income coming in if they don't have employment. And so we look at how a young person's overall financial picture evolves with time. How is their income looking, their credit, their savings? How are they building? We actually match savings that young adults put aside throughout a portion of our program. We provide a year of credit counseling as well. And so we see really strong progress for folks over time that's sustained in terms of financial security. The final metric that we think about, and ultimately what we believe, is achievable with job and financial security, is housing security. The folks coming into our program are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Once they leave our program, as they go through our program, are we getting them to a place of housing stability? Are we empowering them to get themselves to a place of housing stability? And that's a question that we ask. We actually collect that data monthly over the course of 3 years after an individual finishes a job placement with us. So we have a very rich data set that shows us just how great of a job we're doing at getting folks to a place of stability, a stability that they might not have imagined was possible, but with the pathway to employment and education that they've received, with the support in building savings and building a strong credit score. Now housing is all of a sudden something that actually seems sustainable. And so those three metrics, that's really what drives us, that what drives the innovation. At break time, that's what drives our long-term strategy and thinking about our role in the ecosystem.
Interesting. And in the beginning, we alluded to some of the ways that society is changing. And I'm sure you've been thinking about this, but there's a lot of talk about how artificial intelligence is going to drive a whole series of generations from job security to not, or maybe even to more subservient type of roles. So there's a real concern that with the power of artificial intelligence, previous historical jobs that have been um, vastly human oriented, obviously, where everything from, in some cases, manual work through automation, through innovation work, and even through knowledge work. A lot of that is going to be replaced by AI. So there's a real big concern about current workforce layoffs, but then also what the future looks like for future generations, current generations, 18-year-olds, all the way through children, about what their future looks like. And so, first of all, are you seeing an uptake on distress by the way that society is changing so quickly in today's age range that would, and I think you mentioned 18 to 24. So in that age range, have you seen some influence of that happening already? And how do you think about this societal pressure that we're starting to see the edges of?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it. And AI is going to have, and it's already had a very significant impact on the labor market and on all of our lives. And I've seen it manifest in a number of different ways already. I've seen folks a few years behind me in school graduating with computer science degrees or applied math degrees like I did, finding it hard to find a job when they were told initially that that major would be the golden ticket to a great, good paying job. I've seen young people go out for interviews and be asked about their knowledge of AI and their experience with AI. AI is being sort of built into job descriptions as a skill that folks need to have, that's required. And so it's changing all kinds of jobs. It's eliminating a number of jobs. I think I've seen it most prevalently in computer science and sort of entry level coding jobs that AI has displaced. And so it's already shaking up the labor market and will continue to do so. And I always come back to the fact that, you know, technology and its disruptions on the labor market should remind us just how important it is to ensure that the folks around us have the soft skills they need to succeed in any job because we have to be malleable. I mean, very few people go through their whole career without having to pivot or change in some way. The types of folks who are entering their career 40, 45 years ago, many folks, the job they entered no longer exists and they had to evolve, they had to change with time. But the thing that they needed all throughout was professionalism, punctuality, communication, conflict management, those soft skills that make human labor valuable, those soft skills that can't be replaced by AI and that are needed in every single job. And so at break time, we're laser focused on getting folks upskilled with the soft skills they need to succeed, even if they have to pivot, even if they have to change throughout their career, which almost everyone does, even before the impact of AI. But we also have partners in uh, a variety of industries that have hard skill programs that skill folks up for very specific careers, whether that's in phlebotomy, whether that's in um, I mean, all sorts of different jobs. We have folks that different hospital jobs that you can get trained up for, more mechanic type jobs, jobs in all different industries and fields. There are lots of training programs that already exist that we can set folks up with and help them get into that career. But at the end of the day, they need the soft skills to succeed in those programs and ultimately to succeed in those jobs. So for us at break time, we are paying very close attention to what AI is doing to the labor market and to the world. We're doubling down on our commitment to soft skill development and trying to share with folks just how important that is and not to forget about that. And we're continuing to deepen our partnerships with hard skill training programs in industries that continue to be at high demand or where we anticipate higher and higher demand as we continue to see these shifts in the labor market.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, and it kind of does tap into the whole premise behind this podcast. It's looking at innovation through the eye of evolution and natural selection, and you can very much think about this period that we're going through as a huge transitionary phase that's caused by a very large disruption, right? So when you have stable environments, you have a disruption. The species that are able to cope with that are the ones that are the most adaptable. And what you're telling me is exactly that, is like we're going through this transition phase societally that's going to have a major impact on future generations. And so the ones that are the most adaptable are the ones that are going to have the best chances. And what you're doing is you're molding these minds into becoming the most adaptable. Number one, by optimizing on the soft skills that this major disruption can't address right now, but then also complementing that with some of the hard skills, which is okay, how do you leverage these new opportunities to then become more influential and more of a leader yourself?
Yeah, and also coaching our young people to um, be great at interviewing, be great at navigating the job search process, be great at researching careers. I mean, all of our young people, as part of our Launchpad program, our 3-week soft skills job training program, have to complete a career pathways presentation where they research a specific career pathway. They research what the salary bands are. They research what education and credentials are needed to get a position in that field. So our young people are being equipped with the skills not only they need to succeed on the job, but also that they need to navigate the job market. And I think that's really important to note when you talk about adaptability. We're training our young people to be very adaptable, to understand how to navigate the job process, but also just resources in general, so that over time, whether they're working with break time or not, they're prepared for all the seismic shifts that are ahead, because it certainly doesn't stop with AI. There's all kinds of things that will continue to disrupt the world and disrupt the labor market. And we need to train young people to be adaptable, because change is inevitable and change can have a really disproportionate effect on the lives of the folks who are all already being disproportionately affected by so many other challenges in society.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, the approach that you take and the structure around what you've built, I feel that it could be useful outside of the homeless space as well. I mean, I think about just the kids going through high school, and whether they have a home or not, these soft skills, these professional skills, these leadership skills that you're teaching. Are not being taught necessarily in our curriculums in the school system. And so I think that the value that you're creating, obviously you're very focused on a particular problem, but I think this is the lessons to take out of this are much broader. And so if we think of it from that perspective, what would it take to scale Break Time's approach more broadly from Massachusetts, let's say nationally or globally? Have you thought about that? Is there a path for Beyond Mass, or are you exclusively a Massachusetts-based organization? I know you are right now, but is that your goal?
Yeah, well, as part of our 5-year strategic plan, 2025 to 2029, we are very laser focused on Massachusetts. We're focused on deepening our impact here and really becoming a hub for solving young adult homelessness. What that means to us is being really great at what we do around job and financial security for young people, but also being an incredible collaborator with others, so that break time feels like a one-stop shop for everything that young adults might need. As I mentioned earlier, we recently purchased 63 Franklin Street, a 5-story building right by downtown Crossing. It's 34,000 square feet. We were able to take advantage of a dip in the commercial real estate market to be able to afford it, and have just finished renovating part of the building. And within the building, half of it is going to be used and is currently being used by Break Time to provide our programs and services. We've got a drop in space on the 3rd floor. We've got our educational space for Launchpad, case management space, and other programming space on the 4th floor. And then we've got more office, meeting, collaborative space on the 5th floor. But the second half of the building, the second floor, the first floor, and our lower level, we're renting to partners to create this sort of one-stop shop for everything a young adult needs. We're hoping to open, just as an example, with Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program, we're looking to open a clinic on the second floor. So the young person could come to break time, they could get soft skills job training program, they can meet with their case manager, they could go down, actually take a shower and do laundry on the third floor, leave with food, clothing, and hygiene products, and then go do a doctor's appointment on the second floor, all connected by an elevator and not hours commuting on the MBTA. And so we're really excited about what this means. And I think there's a lot of excitement around the country about this model and this approach. And so as I think about beyond the 2020s, as I look ahead to 2030 and beyond, I really believe that as we continue to prove out what we're doing here, as we continue to strengthen and fine tune every part of our model, that we can educate other organizations to implement pieces of what we do. I see that as our path to scale, really as providing the technical assistance and support for other organizations and even local and state governments and other parts of the country, providing them with a toolkit of what we've developed here at Break Time, what we've been able to prove through rigorous analysis and data evaluation is working, and help them to implement it in their communities. I see that as the long-term path to scale. I'm excited to continue to explore in the shorter term different revenue strategies that can help to sustain our work. Most of our revenue does come from donations and grants from very generous families and foundations. Um, but through rental income in the building and through other innovative strategies, we're thinking about how do you more sustainably fund this work so that more folks can access it. And I think to your point, Nick, there is definitely a value of what we do around soft skills development for a broader audience. And so I'm thinking a lot about that and how we leverage that to ultimately unlock revenue that can support us providing those services to our young adults. And so that's all definitely top of mind and part of the long-term vision. But at this very moment, we are focusing on, I would say, going deep versus going broad, focusing on what we're best at and honing in on that, focusing on the community that we know and love and that we know how to serve, and then through that process, eventually getting to the place where break time and what we've developed can become a resource to the whole country or even more broadly.
That's excellent. And whether you're in the nonprofit space or the for-profit space or a startup, sometimes having too much money can actually be distracting because you end up throwing money at things that there might be clear signals as to whether they're working or not by just virtue of just having too much money. But having said that, because there might be people listening that are philanthropic, people that want to donate, people that are resources to give, if you had, say, 10 times the amount of resources you have right now, and I know you have a very laser focused strategy, right? But let's say you came across 10 times the amount of resources, what are some of the boldest bets that you would make or assumptions that you would be testing given the new resources? Do you have a vision for how something material like that would change or evolve your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we're seeing an unprecedented level of demand for our services. In the first quarter of this year, we had more young people come through our doors than the entirety of 2024. And so, um,
Wow.
as we've scaled up our community outreach efforts, but also as increasing rent prices and other factors have continued to exacerbate the issue of young adult homelessness, we already need to be, scaling up our capacity and have been to serve more and more young adults. And so contributions to our work go right to work in supporting young adults. I always say if you donate right now, I get to support the young person who's coming in any second right now to access services from us. And so we definitely don't have the problem of having too much money to sit on. Every cent that's coming in is going right out to support a young person and all the innovative ways that we get it done. So I'd say first and foremost, if we had more funding, we would continue to scale to be able to serve more and more young people. The demand is there and the demand is knocking at our doors. And we would love to have the funding to support those folks and continue to deepen the services we provide to all the young adults that we support. I think beyond that, if we had um, just like a tremendous increase in funding and we're able to think really creatively, um, I would really, continue to invest in making what we do better and better for more people. I again am driven by data. I'm driven by the data around job, financial, and housing security for our young adults. And I know there's always ways to fine tune and tweak what we do. And I think it's important that we create something that's excellent versus creating something that's really good, and just focusing on scaling it. I'm someone who believes that quality is more important than growth, growth, growth. And ultimately, to do best by our young people, we want to make sure that we've created something that's absolutely fantastic for them. I believe we have done that. I also believe that there's continued and will always be room for improvement. So I will first and foremost put resources to improving the quality of what we do so that we're having a more transformative impact on every young person we serve. I'd put the next set of dollars that I have towards scaling that impact to reach more young people here in Massachusetts, and if the money allows, even beyond. And then ultimately, I'd invest in, again, if the resources allowed, invest in really codifying our model into a toolkit so we can start to educate folks from across the country and implementing it, and invest in more rigorous external evaluation of our work to support and validate what we already know to be true about how transformative Breaktime's model is. Um, so, as I always say to our donors, like if you give us the funding, we will put it right to work. There are so many things we can do. This is a hard environment where the philanthropic sector is stretched in a lot of directions. Government funding has contracted. And so we need the funding, we need the support. And I can say with 100% confidence that with every dollar we get, we can do more and have more impact than ever before. So the challenge you're presenting would be an exciting one to me, and we
Mhm.
are 1,000% ready to go and dive in and put that money to work.
I believe everything you said, and it's extraordinary what you've done so far. I like to finish with a singular question that you would be most in a position to be able to answer. So I think, given your experience and your outlook in this, with the world that is increasingly defined by inequalities,
Yeah,
how do you see the role of transitional employment evolving, not just as a job solution, but as a force for societal resilience?
excellent question. I think as inequality has increased, the ability for folks to get into the workforce, especially as you've needed higher and higher skill sets for the average job, it's just gotten wider and wider. And so the person that doesn't have the support to develop the soft skills they need to succeed in the workforce, it's getting harder and harder for that person to get into the workforce. And I think AI is going to continue to exacerbate that. So that transitional employment, which is that bridge that connects that individual to being able to get into the workforce and grow in their career, is becoming more and more important and more urgent. I think giving folks an opportunity to that's a little bit lower stakes to solidify their soft skills, to start to build the hard skills they need for a specific career, and to sort of more gently ramp up into the workforce is so important. For a lot of young people, they might fall flat on their faces when they jump into a job with very high standards, very high criteria, and it's their first job, high pressure. They've got a lot of instability in their lives. They don't even know where they're going to sleep tonight, let alone how they're going to, you know, rapidly skill up to succeed in this job, high pressure job. We need a bridge for young people. And for lots of folks with privilege, they've had that, like myself. You get that in college. You get the opportunity to make mistakes. You get the opportunity to have internships and start to develop the skills you need before you dive right in to a full-time, high pressure, high stakes job. And so that bridge exists for some folks, folks with the access to those opportunities, folks with the privilege or money to make those bridges a reality. But for a lot of young adults, they hit 18, they're immediately fully responsible for their finances themselves. Sometimes they have one or two kids already. They're taking care of other people. they don't have a second to waste in terms of getting income. So they're diving into the workforce without that bridge. So I think as inequality continues to increase, and as we look at creating equality in our society, transitional employment is a humongous key tool to achieving that and creating that bridge for young people so that they can more gradually get into the workforce, more gradually skill up. It ultimately serves everyone because we all need great people at our companies, at our organizations, in government. We need great people doing great work. And if we offer transitional employment, we're pipelining so many folks into the labor market that are going to offer such incredible value across all industries.
Well, Connor, this has been such an eye-opening conversation for me. I commend you on all the work that you've done so far and the tremendous success. You're doing such wonderful work and influencing lives. I can only imagine just how fulfilling it must be to see some of these cohorts go through your system and become successful people in their own right. And so with that, I just want to, again, commend you on your work. Congratulations on success so far. Congratulations on the new location in Downtown Crossing. And thank you so much for being with us on unNatural Selection.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's been such an honor and privilege to be on your podcast.
That was Connor Schoen. Now, unnatural signals.
What Connor is really doing is fixing a blind spot, not with charity, with structure. The signals that we're archiving are: most untapped talent isn't broken, it's just disconnected. Soft skills are economic infrastructure. You don't discover users by waiting in an office. And meeting people where they are changes who gets to compete. Breaktime isn't rescuing people, it's rerouting them back into the economy. And that might be the most practical form of compassion there is.
Thanks for listening to Unnatural Selection. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone shaping the future. Explore more at unnaturalselection.net and connect with us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Until next time, keep evolving.